What's up, guys, and welcome back to the Figure Forecast podcast. It is your host, Maeve, and
Scarlett.
hey. And today we have a very special guest. We have been really looking forward to getting on for a long time. And I know you guys are really excited about this episode, all about PED usage as well. So a massive welcome to Coach Dazz. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking out the time. And Dazz is a bikini competitor, online coach, and a PED educator with the Physique Collective. So she was literally the first person on my mind when we thought about doing this episode because her knowledge around PED usage and everything in between is just incredible. So we know it's going to be a cracker episode.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm sort of an open book when it comes to PEDs because not enough women are an open book about it.
Absolutely. And it's so hard to get like sound information about it. It's incredibly difficult, really is. And like when I came across your page and I was just watching video after video after video, I was just like, this is a gold mine. It was just fantastic.
Thank you. There has been a bit of a pushback, and you would probably experience it too from the Australian scene, just because they're so far behind in their PED education that you've got someone new coming into the industry giving a different perspective, and people are just pushing back a little bit. I've been a little bit bullied on social media, but I'm determined to just stick my foot and get out the content that
I would believe that, because I find it quite hard to source very good information from Australian accounts. Sometimes I do find it's definitely behind versus kind of US and UK.
Yeah. I think because whenever, and you're probably the same, like whenever we go looking for a coach, we usually go overseas. Like there's probably not an Australian coach that we really want to work with.
Yeah.
And then to have people overseas wanting to work with me, like I really take that. I don't take that for granted by any means.
Yeah. I've made it, Mom.
Yeah. I call my mom every time.
Okay, so we are going to crack right into this episode. And just before we start talking about PEDs, I just want to make it very clear, this is not us promoting the use of them or saying anybody has to take them. This podcast for us is purely about providing sound information that, you know, people are then empowered to go off and make their own decisions with that. We just want to make sure there is, you know, really good advice, and you're not kind of just putting pieces together from different accounts and copying different cycles from online, because that's really where the problems arise, right? People don't ask questions, they don't inform themselves, and they end up in some shitty situations. And then they probably come to you to help them get out of said shitty situations.
Yeah, I think there's such a stigma around female PED use that females don't ask questions because they almost don't want people to know that they're taking them. And then they go into dangerous protocols that have detrimental effects to their fertility and their femininity.
I guess we'll start on that then. What are some of maybe the bad protocols you see being used, or, you know, like if someone's come to you like with a terrible setup, like what kind of examples would you be able to give us?
Typically, the most common one is Anavar use in females. I'm not saying that Anavar can't be used in females, but it usually is very well, abused in females. And I think that it's been turned the female drug of choice, which I disagree with. And I think that females will often go on a cycle of Anavar. They will realize that, or they won't notice any side effects from the first time. And they will think that they're one of these resilient people who don't get side effects from steroid use, and they do it again and again and again, and then eventually they get the side effects because their androgen load builds up over time. And often, and I'm sure you've heard about this, we get that topped with an estrogen blocker towards the end of prep, and that just makes no sense to me, because I don't understand why the coach would think that estrogen would be high at the end of prep. But, you know, you've got very low energy availability with very, very large output, and then you're topping that with something that's going to bring down their exogenous and testosterone production and shut off their estrogen as well. And it's just a recipe for disaster. And then I think, particularly in the Australian scene amongst bikini competitors, they're not spending enough time off between shows to really regain their health, go off all the androgens and things like that to get their body functioning normally before they decide to go into another prep again. And I think that it's just this constant state that like shit doesn't matter until it matters.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
And it's funny that you actually mentioned that, because I assumed you were going to get a very different answer about, like what females shouldn't take and stuff, but it's kind of highlighting this thing that people, okay, well, that's what everybody takes. I've seen, girls take Anwar, and that's just what you do, and that's what I'm going to do. And it's just really interesting to hear that, to hear
Yeah.
that side of it.
And I'm not saying that like the girls that we see on the Olympia stage aren't doing that. I guarantee I'm pretty certain that's exactly what they're taking, but they're like that, 1% of how many people that can really compete year after year after year and maintain a fertile status, because they are these incredibly resilient people or individuals. But not many people are built like that. Not many people can maintain their menstrual cycle. And we'll often I've seen stories of bikini competitors talking about their PED cycles, and they'll be like, no, I haven't had any side effects, but I have gone like a year or so without my period. And I'm like, okay, so you're just not fertile. Like that's your reproductive system just isn't working, but that's not a side effect. Like, can we not register what's going on here? So yeah, I think like as far as what I wouldn't recommend to females, it's to jump straight on something like Anabar.
What would
Do you
you
think
say?
that people, sorry,
No, you go.
do you think that people just tend to think it's safer as well, because obviously it's a tablet form, and rather than, the injectables and things like that?
Yeah. And I know that you wanted to get into this later in the podcast, but like my suggestion would be go the non-androgenic route, take advantage of those multiple pathways that we can use. And then after a year or so of doing that, you can introduce androgens. If you need them, you might not need them. And then as far as like preference goes, we would want to use androgens that have been designed for androgen sensitive females and children in mind. And then we would go injectables over orals.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think a lot of people avoid.
I think a lot of people would like shit the bed
Needles, yeah.
if you mentioned an injectable to them over an oral, but maybe we'll kind of just explain why, that's recommended, or,
Yeah.
what the
So
different effects or risks are.
yeah, so something like an Anavar is going to get I guess what would you call it, metabolized through the liver. And so then we're going to see an impact on your HDL and LDL levels. I think we've seen Anavar bring down someone's HDL levels. This was 20 milligrams of Anavar by 30%, which is quite a lot. And then it brings down their exogenous testosterone as well. So if we imagine that when a female is going through prep, she's already kind of having that HPA axis down regulation, that then if she's topping it up with an Anavar as well, we're going to see that further decline of her endogenous hormone production. And then as far as like the easiest way to kind of explain it is if you had a male athlete and he said, look, I want to do PEDs, but I only want to do orals. We all know that straight away. It's like a no, like, do you want to die kind of thing? And I don't understand why it's different for females, or why there's this stigma that females shouldn't inject themselves when it's much healthier than taking an oral. But the biggest concern with taking an oral is that it is metabolized through the liver. So something like an Anavar, it's unmethylated.
Yeah. And as an alternative, just I guess to skip the Anavar phase of anyone's journey, what would you look at as an alternative for that kind of first cycle or first kind of intro to PEDs?
To androgens or to PEDs?
To androgens.
Okay. So after we've done all the non-androgenic stuff, the first androgens that as far as like my list of most favored to least favored, would be Primo, Masteron, and then Anavar. So I would go like in that order. So we got 2 injectables, and then we've got Anavar. Generally, Primo is often fate. So that's why, like, if you can't get it tested legitimately, then I would say probably go for a Masteron. If you're still unsure about the legitimacy of that one, then go for Anavar. And then after that, it'd be something like an NPP. But rarely would I go for that, just because it's got a little bit higher of an androgen load than the others.
Yeah. And I suppose when it comes to side effects, that is probably the most common question that was in my questions box when I put it up. So I think the common ones that people are probably aware of are like the fertility end of things, you know, deeper voice, but I guess just to highlight more of the risks and maybe what increases your risk while using them.
Yeah. I think, okay, so we'll go over like what increases your risk. For females, it's more a duration of use rather than the total load of androgens. So that's why we kind of want to do these short cycles in between, which again is why we're better off taking advantage of the non-androgenics because they can be in play indefinitely, whereas like the androgens need to be 4, 6, or 8 week blocks, and we're not really going to get much growth out of that period. But essentially, yeah, we're looking at duration of use as being sort of like the biggest risk factor. And then as far as like the risk, you said that like fertility is one that most females are aware of, but I feel like it's the one that's put on the back burner just because it's not an obvious thing. And I feel like females just forget about it. And a lot of females think that if they're still bleeding and getting their menstrual cycle, then they're ovulating, and that's not true. If you're bleeding doesn't mean that you're ovulating. And then we've got growth of an Adam's apple. We've got enhanced jawline. We've got like facial hair or bodily hair that's unwanted. Androgenic alopecia, which is your hair falling out. We've got deepening of the voice. We've got androgenic related acne. What else is there? Obviously the infertility. I think I named most of them.
Yeah. None of them sensitive, do they?
Yeah. And most of it's like the male characteristics that most females don't desire.
Yeah. Would you say that? Oh my God, I lost my thread. Actually, it was in my head and I went to get it out of my mouth and it was completely gone. I did get a question when it comes to Anavar versus Primo, and not necessarily the risks, but like what different roles would they play? Like why would someone pick one over another?
So again, the Primo is going to have a better, as far as like if we're looking at from a health perspective, Primo is going to be better. And then if we're looking for like an anabolic perspective, then Primo is going to be better. I don't really see much of a role for Anavar in an off season as far as muscle growth goes. I can see a role for it sort of towards the end of prep when performance is dropping off, and we might just need to drive that little bit of extra performance. Or, you know, if someone was caught in a house fire and was a burn victim, then yeah, like take Anavar. But I think for the most part, it's just about what one's going to give us the best results in a growth phase. And then we're probably looking at Primo, and then we're mitigating any of the health risk associated with taking an oral. Also, where was I going with that one? When we're talking about like someone's first year exposure to androgens, we would only want to use them in an off season. We wouldn't want to use them in a prep scenario when they're already coupled with this stress environment and this HPA axis downregulation or HPO axis downregulation. So we would only use them in an off season, and that's probably why like a Primobolan or a Masteron is going to be favored over an Anavar. Even in prep, I would still opt for a Primo. But then maybe towards the final week or so or 2 weeks of prep, we might chuck in a little bit of Anavar there, just again to drive up that training performance.
Yeah.
When it comes to side effects then, and kind of, because this is something that will creep on slowly, like over time, you know, you won't just wake up one day and be, you know, have a big jawline and a deep voice. Like there's something that sort of gradually comes, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if you were sort of like had a client, for instance, and it was their first time being exposed to it, like how would you allow for them to see if they were going through them changes? Like, is there anything that you would sort of put in place to measure
so
it?
like as far as like monitoring side effects,
Yeah.
for my female athletes, I get them to take their basal body temperature every morning, or if they've got like an Oura ring or something like that that does it for them. One of my I wouldn't call her a friend, but she's Australian, and so I'm calling her a friend. She came out with a product called Femtech. I think she lives in the UK now. With a product called Femtech, and that measures your basal body temperature every morning. But it's quite expensive, and this big ring that you have to wear when you sleep. But you can just stick a thermometer in your mouth, and that's going to tell you whether or not you're still ovulating. So if you do lose your menstrual cycle during prep, or if you're unsure whether or not you're ovulating, it's going to tell you, because we're going to have that little bit of a rise in temperature during the luteal phase of your cycle, which is the second half of your cycle. The other things that I get them to do is take a picture of their jawline and their hairline. They don't have to send it to me with their check-in, but if they just keep it in their phone, so that they can monitor any changes there. Another thing, and this is sort of like just how confident you are with it and how far you want to go, but I do have like one of my clients who wants to monitor the size of their clitoris. So she takes a picture of her clitoris like every other week or something.
You get those check-ins?
Yeah, no. But she it's because she had a boyfriend. She was asking, and her boyfriend's like, no, I haven't noticed anything. And I was like, look, get him to take a photo. Don't get him to take it on his phone. In case something ever happens, take it on your phone.
That shit.
Put it in a locked album. But yeah, that's something else that they can do if they want to do it. And then the other one that I get them to do is download a voice monitoring app. So I use Spectrum, and they usually say 3 sentences every morning, the same 3 sentences. And we're just looking for a change in pitch there.
How long would you kind of say, like, I had a question, how long do they take to kick in? But just kind of similar to stay on this topic, how long would you generally give it kind of before you may expect to see them? Or
there's no timeline, because it really depends on how androgen sensitive someone is and how well they're metabolizing their androgens. So and age is like a huge factor in that as well. Like the older population is going to be slower at being able to metabolize these androgens than what a younger population is. But yeah, it really just comes down to their bioidentical genetics, whatever you want to call it. And then, yeah, how well they can process those drugs. And some females are just not going to be as androgen sensitive as the others, which is, I went through before what androgens I would start with, and I said primo masteron, then anabar. I should have mentioned at the top of that would have been testosterone for females. Yeah. So if we're looking at introducing testosterone, it's bioidentical. It can be measured in serum labs, and we have long-term data on female use in it. And the beautiful thing about starting on testosterone is that you can test your androgen sensitivity. So let's say if I have a female starting on 3 milligrams a week, and that brings her right up to the happy range of where I want her to be, then I know that she's a pretty androgen sensitive individual, and I'm going to be very reservative when I introduce other compounds. If I have to bring her up to like that 8 milligrams or something like that to get her in the happy range, then I know that we can probably be a little bit more risky when it comes to using those other androgens. In having said that too, if someone, when I said you would use non-androgenic compounds for your first year, then androgenic compounds, if someone was looking at being a seasonal competitor and they were showing signs of low testosterone, I would put testosterone in right away. Yeah, that's actually a really good point. Like and I think HRT and stuff is actually starting to be more talked about, which is great. Yeah. But just to touch on that, because I think a lot of even like non-competitors probably fall into the position where they experience like super low testosterone levels and may need to go down that route as well. So just maybe touch on that for a moment and kind of why you might implement it, or maybe what you would look at where your test levels are, like when you get them tested in bloods and stuff like that, when you would recommend someone kind of, or why you would recommend someone going down the testosterone route. So as far as like when we want to test for a female, we want to test 1 week before your menstrual bleed. And that's just really to more look so at the estrogen to progesterone ratio. But yeah, so with the testosterone, we would want to start on that, because when our ovarian reserves are diminished, so like through menopause, or when our HPA axis is malfunctioning, which is in a PrEP scenario, Most of our estrogen comes from the aromatization of testosterone. So we would start with that testosterone base. You would start at 3 milligrams a week, 3 to 4 milligrams a week, and then scale up from there. Just going to mute. I have been trying to close my WhatsApp and I lost it. Trying to close my WhatsApp so I didn't get any notifications. It won't let me close it.
I've turned off all notifications off everything, and
I hate
it's great. I hate them. Ding, ding, ding. No, leave me alone.
the constant violators that send like one-line messages. You're muted.
Yeah,
You're not coming off mute.
instantly leaves chat. Yeah. You mentioned MAST being your second option. Can you explain maybe the differences in that versus primo, as in regards to female usage?
So the advantage of primo over mastron is we're going to see less modulation of that estrogen. So we're going to see, if we use primo over mastron, we're going to see more of a steady kind of level of estrogen, whereas mastron's going to have that little bit of an AI effect where it's going to kind of shut down your it's not an estrogen blocker, but we will see that little bit more of a drop off in estrogen. Yeah. So that's why I prefer primo. Estrogen is beautiful for women, and it's beautiful for men too. It's beautiful for growth. It's good for maintaining HDL, LDL levels, for what do you call it? Blood glucose management, and it's good for visceral fat and reducing the impact of that. So it's like, it really makes no sense that we want to shut that off throughout a prep or for a contest prep competitor whatsoever. It's the imbalance of estrogen that's a problem, not estrogen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone actually, quite a few people wanted to know, like, obviously we're kind of big on the physical side effects, and like we can monitor things like voice and jawline and clitoral enlargement and hair and stuff like that. But I did actually get a few questions on mental health, and is there, you know, any instances that they may impact that in a negative way or in any way?
It's a tough one, because I think it then comes down again to that individual and how sensitive they are to it. I think I was having this conversation with someone before about, like, he's a bodybuilder, and he was asking me whether or not it would be okay for him to do cocaine on the weekend. And I was like, choose your poison.
Yeah.
Like, you're taking steroids and they are neurotoxic, and then you're topping that with recreational drugs as well. Like, let's just choose one.
Yeah.
It's sort of like, you know, if you had someone that was eating Maccas every night, drinking and smoking, it's like, can we just go with one for now?
Yeah.
Like, please.
Be a little bit responsible about a better life.
Yeah, it's sort of, that's sort of where I am with that one. If someone's got a lifestyle where they're wanting to like smoke weed every day, they're doing these kind of narcotics on the weekends and things like that, then I'd be like, maybe you should be a little bit careful about using PEDs. We obviously have some PEDs that are more neurotoxic than others. So things like your 19 NORs are going to be more neurotoxic. But females, we don't tend to use those ones, like your primo, your mastron, your anavara DHT derivatives, not your 19 NOR. So yeah, I wouldn't really, like, I'm not saying that they're not neurotoxic, but they're less neurotoxic. And then I think it really just depends on all those external factors and how sensitive you are to whether or not it's worth whether or not the risk is acceptable for you.
I think the whole lifestyle thing is massive in it, because if you don't have your kind of ducks in order in other areas, they're probably going to contribute to it more than but typically, like, bodybuilders who go down the PED route are probably going to be eating really good food and feeling really good, sleeping a lot, you drinking enough water, like, so they're doing all of the things that they're probably kind of getting themselves to a decent place mentally before throwing all of that.
I saw another question on your thing was like, I thought they were illegal and you couldn't buy them, and I was like, Yeah, but
Sorry, can I
so
just
is like
say,
every
yeah,
other drug in
people
Australia.
specifically messaged me asking where to buy them in Australia.
Yeah,
Guys,
yeah.
like, come on.
When
We
I
can't tell you that. Like,
the seminar I did in the UK, someone asked where are the coaches getting it, and Joe was like, "Let's be clear that the coaches aren't getting it.
no, you know,
We do not give it to our clients."
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I even hate giving out sources to people. Like I'm just like, do it yourself. Like I did.
yeah,
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 get
yeah.
more friends.
Get
And
more
then
friends.
yeah,
Yeah, get more friends. Another question on obviously quite relevant to our audience and the podcast and who's listening. Do you feel that PEDs are 100% necessary when you are competing in the more muscular classes as a female? Like bikini, obviously they are prevalent there, people use them, may not be 100% necessary for
yeah,
absolutely everyone. Whereas if you're trying to achieve, you know, a lot of muscularity and size and, you know, working to quite a large physique, like female wise, do you think that, you know, eventually you are going to
yeah.
have to go down that route?
Yeah, if we look at sort of like what's needed for the class criteria, I think it's a little bit inevitable that if you're aiming for higher than bikini, you're going to have to use androgens to get a good placing. I think even with bikini, sort of like what we're seeing recently, unless you are a genetic freak, you do have to use some form of PEDs to be able to place, you know, with those Olympia standards. And then when we're saying like PEDs, even for something like a bikini competitor, it's probably safer that you use HRT in between competing or like whilst you're competing rather than not using anything at all. And then for the higher classes, like your figure or your wellness athletes, I'd say, yeah, pretty much with where the standard is now, you do have to. Like we do have unique individuals like Erin Stern who could place, you know, top in the Olympia and figure, but she's not able to do it anymore.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like even at an amateur level, like it was 4 years since my last show, and going into this season, I was like, holy shit! Like it just grows like in that space of time. So yeah, it's interesting to see.
Yeah, and I say that because every girl wants to be a wellness competitor. It seems like at the moment,
I
and
know.
I'm just like, you're not genetically. We're trying to bring up your lower body to fit the bikini criteria. What makes you think that you're wellness? And then if you did want to go into wellness, it means pushing these androgens to an extent that you will get virilization side effects. Are you comfortable with that? Yep, cool. All right, well then we go. But if you're really wanting to maintain a femininity and a fertile status, I recommend not doing it.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. Is there like, let's say a client comes to you and, you know, they're a competitor and they're kind of making that decision, like, do I go down this route? Is there like a, you know, a checklist or a kind of a series of questions you would kind of get them to think about before, right, taking the plunge?
Yeah, I think it's like just your standard. I encourage people to ask their coaches this as well. Like people that do consults with me, I'm like, ask your coach, like, what is the plan to maintain your health? What's the plan to mitigate any of the side effects? What do these drugs do? And what are the potential side effects? And I think like if you can have that conversation with your client and then they're okay accepting all that, then that's fine. But I think also like with these categories, like say if you have a bikini competitor wanting to move up to wellness, and it means that we're going to have to push those androgens. It's sort of like in wellness, they still want that femininity on stage. And you're going to lose that, and that's going to affect your placing. So like these are all things that you have to consider. And you know, you're a 24-year-old who doesn't want to have kids. You're not a 30-year-old who doesn't want to have kids.
Yeah, that's a big thing, because do you see a lot of quite young competitors jumping the gun? Like, you know, it's different for someone like me. Let's say I'm 32. I know I don't want kids. So it's a very different decision for me versus me at 22 who didn't want kids, but maybe I did, you know?
Yeah. I was the same. Like I probably went through like a year where I wanted kids, and I know I don't now. But yeah, if you had have asked me like 6 years ago, I probably would have said maybe.
Yeah.
Now, like I know that I don't want them, but I don't want to risk the androgen side effects. Like I I would feel uncomfortable, and this might be going a little bit too deep, but uncomfortable having sex if I knew that my clitoris was bigger than what it was prior.
Yeah.
Or like if I look different down there, I'll just be like, oh, I don't really,
Yeah.
I'm not sure what they would think.
I'm shut up shop.
Yeah.
That's for business.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's just something that I'm not comfortable with.
Yeah.
And it costs a lot.
Obviously we mentioned kind of doing a year before you go down the androgenic route, and I think that's probably where there's even less information being provided about, you know, what kind of substances you can maybe implement and use and could benefit from before just jumping in the deep end, and maybe how much benefit you can expect from those things.
This is where a lot of the pushback from me has been. I've seen, when I say one of the top bikini competitors in Australia, I think you know exactly who I'm talking about, will put on his story, if any coach is suggesting that you use growth hormone and insulin, like run, you're not even a pro or whatnot. And I'm like, dude, you have your girls on Anavar and Nolvadex for 20 years.
The coach, I know exactly who you're talking about.
Yeah, fuck off. But anyway, growth hormone and insulin. So they're two of them. So metformin's a really good one. Metformin will improve like your nutrient partitioning. And then we've got other health comms, like as far as antimicrobial effects, improving your HDL, LDL levels, improving your blood glucose levels. But the main part from a physique perspective with that one is improving nutrient partitioning. Then we got telmisartan, again, does improve nutrient partitioning, and it does have muscle retention properties. But the biggest thing with that one is bringing down your blood pressure, because we know that when we're using androgens, like that's one of the things that does go up. So just managing that. Then we've got injectable L-carnitine, which I kind of just sum up, it acts as like a catalyst. So it kind of like enhances all these processes. But another great thing that it does, that if we're using compounds for fat loss and we're getting all these free fatty acids kind of freeing up, clenbuterol will like kind of wash them out, if that makes sense. It's sort of like, you know, phase 1, phase 2 liver detoxification. One drops it off, the other one cleans it out. It's sort of like how clenbuterol works. Metformin, telmisartan, clenbuterol. Then you've got your lipolytics, which are going to be, L-carnitine, not clenbuterol, L-carnitine. Then you got your lipolytics, which is your clenbuterol, T4, T3, and yohimbine. Yohimbine possibly more potent in females. We do see a little bit of a better response in females than males. But that one does have to be taken fasted. As soon as you eat, you kind of like get rid of all those. And that one play for as long as clenbuterol. But clenbuterol has aspects as far as mTOR phosphorylation, so it does have muscle retention properties, and it does drive fat loss. Your T4, your T3 you would only use on a needs basis. If you're in prep, you notice thyroid dysfunction, then you can introduce those. But whilst you're using those, you would take all other measures to kind of support your thyroid production naturally. Those are the lipolytics. GH is another lipolytic that you can use, incredibly potent compound in females. Females don't get as great of a response from the IGF, from the GH to IGF-1 conversion. It's about 3 times less than males. So we do just want to use that for like a fat loss purpose. And that would be just like 1 IU pre-workout, pre-cardio, 60 or 90 minutes before your cardio. What else have we got? Insulin, incredibly good for storage hormone. When we notice that like food is peaking, appetite is shot, or the reduced pumps in the gym or something like that in the off season, we can introduce a basal insulin. So yeah, first you would introduce a long acting insulin, and then you can introduce a fast acting insulin around their larger meals. Have I gone through them all? No. Metformin, telmisartan, clenbuterol, L-carnitine, yohimbine, T4, T3, growth hormone, insulin. I feel like I'm forgetting one. Oh God.
I'm unsure, but question, because I feel like the two that we've just mentioned, growth hormone and insulin, are probably two that people would freak if you like mentioned them. So I guess because growth hormone you can take year round, right? Like this
Yeah.
you don't need to cycle that one. So maybe like what benefit is it to females specifically to utilize that? And like, why would you use that pre kind of antigen?
So we would add it early into an anabolic stack to take advantage of the hypertrophy perspective. But like I said, we don't get as good of a conversion from the GH to IGF-1. So we're pretty much wanting to use that more for those fat loss properties. And again, it's because it's a non-androgenic compound. So we've got multiple pathways now that we can utilize to get rather appreciable results for a female as far as driving up fat loss, as far as like muscle retention, improving nutrient partitioning, improving recovery rates. We're going to have a rather great advantage with no risk. The only thing to consider, like as far as growth hormone goes, is if you have history of cancer in your family, probably don't do it. If you have diabetes or something like that, probably don't do it because it's going to drive up that blood glucose level. The insulin, a lot of people are afraid of it. For some reason, people think that taking insulin is going to affect their ability for their pancreas to produce insulin. But whatever you don't inject, your pancreas is just going to make up for, and it's pretty responsive in getting that action back, like once you go off the insulin. And you shouldn't stay on insulin indefinitely. You should cycle on and off that. And even when you're on insulin, you should do everything that you need to do to reduce inflammation. I actually just did a video on it yesterday. I think I'm going to put it out today.
If you're gonna go watch that, it'll be up by the time this is out.
Yeah, it's directed at that coach. At the end, I say,
popcorn.
yeah, at the end, I didn't make it too obvious. But at the end, I said, so if your coach is suggesting
you
that
know.
you use Nolvadex and Anavar run, and I've got like a clown on there.
When it comes to insulin, because I was definitely kind of one of those people that was like, oh my God, no, don't touch that. Like you couldn't possibly, but I think it's because you just hear so much like horror stories, but that's obviously down to people just not, using it correctly or, whatever it may be. So what phases would you say, it would be beneficial in for females?
It would be like in their off season, if their blood, you would base it on blood glucose levels. And if their blood glucose levels are becoming suboptimal, and like I said, they're experiencing that increased lethargy, appetite downregulation, decreased pumps in the gym, and their food volume is just really, really high, that's when I would introduce it. And you just introduce it to support the pancreas. Yeah. You're eating abnormally large amounts to grow beyond the size that your body wants to be. You need support.
Yeah. What would you say as well? Because I think people, when they think of PrEP and PEDs, I think they think that's where the risks come from, or that's where side effects, or that's where, negative kind of health effects come from. It's just all the PEDs and it's the drugs and all this. But what would you say, just to highlight how, PrEP in general can affect you? Like if you're a natural competitor, there's still a lot of negative effects that you can get from PrEP as a natural competitor. So maybe just touch on that, because I think I'd like to give the contrast.
So do you mean like sort of like the cons of maintaining a natural status?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I said earlier, like it's sort of just that HPO downregulation. So we're not going to be in a very fertile environment if our body is not able to produce testosterone, estrogen, or progesterone, just because like our HPA axis is malfunctioning. And that's where having like some hormonal support would make sense. It's almost like, I kind of compare it to a menopausal woman. And we all know that like once someone hits menopause, it's very good for their quality of life and for their health outcomes to be on some kind of hormone replacement therapy. You're essentially putting yourself in the same environment going through a PrEP as far as the downregulation of your endogenous hormone production, that you would probably improve your quality of life and health outcomes if you're introducing some form of hormone replacement therapy. That doesn't mean that you're using androgens to bring you beyond super physiological levels for physique outcomes or for physique enhancements or performance enhancements. You're doing it to bring yourself up to baseline.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, with the standards of what's a natural and unnatural competitor, that would mean that you're considered unnatural now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Meredith, do you have any ones that you got sent in?
Yeah, I did have one around fem test, but I think you've pretty much already touched on it. It was hear a lot of people talking about fem test to bring up female rangers when they're being bottomed out. Could you explain why this would be more of a benefit to approach before other PEDs? But you've kind of already touched on that with why you would put that in place first to just bring you back to a normal range of health, really, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and it's bioidentical. We can test serum labs, and we've got long-term data on it. I was sort of having this conversation with Joe when I was like, okay, so if you've got someone in the off season and they want to start PEDs and their testosterone levels are in a really good spot, do we still start them on testosterone or do we start them on another DHT derivative? If it's in the off season, I would probably start them on something like a Primo. But if they're looking at competing soon, or if it's in a prep, I would still start with testosterone.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a needs basis for everything. And this is what I found so hard about like the seminar that I did. I was like, everything here is like an if.
And it depends. Yeah. Everything is an it depends. Literally the answer to everything.
Yeah, it's always going to be like, but then if this is happening, you don't do that. It's almost like you need like one of those grids, like ask a question, yes or no, and then go this way.
Yeah, like
yeah.
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 So another one as well, like if a female wasn't concerned about fertility or viralization, and obviously wanted to go down the androgenic route with, even like maybe more harsher compounds than like your Primo and stuff, would there be more health risks for a female compared to like if a male would take it?
Yeah, just because our ability to metabolize androgens is far less than what it is for males. Yeah. So we're very androgen sensitive in nature. So it would be much more detritus to a female's health than what it would be to a detritus. Is that a word? I don't know. Detrimental to a female's health than what it is to a male's. We're just making up words here.
That's what we do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did get a question about like why females can't take the likes of Deca and Tren and stuff, but we've kind of it's the side effects XXX10 really.
Yeah, and it's just our ability to metabolize them. Yeah.
Awesome. I think that wraps it up, and we've answered quite a few questions, and I think we've definitely got the information we needed from the episode. So I'm actually really excited to upload this, and I hope everybody listening has learned a lot. I definitely have. So thank you again, Dazz, for joining us. If you want to let people know where they can find you, work with you, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so on TikTok and Instagram, it's at Coach Darian Bates. I have this fear that Instagram's going to die soon. So I'm trying to build up my TikTok because I just feel like now that they've got that paid verification thing that people are like, oh, now it's a paid platform. Boo. Yeah. So yeah, that's a thing. On YouTube, it's the same at Coach Darian Bates. I don't post much PED stuff on there, but I post all my workouts and stuff. But I will start posting PED stuff on there, like longer format stuff.
Longer, for sure.
Yeah. If you're looking for PED knowledge, it's probably more Instagram if you want to go more in depth.
And obviously you're an educator with the Physique Collective, so don't be afraid to get a sneaky plug there.
Yeah, so I think I get a video on the Physique Collective like every 2 weeks if you want to keep an eye out for those ones. But regardless of whether or not you're following for me, there's many great other educators on there as well, and you'll learn heaps. And we've all got like a thread there where you can ask any questions and we'll get back to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Really, really, really appreciate you taking the time to chat to us. This was a great episode.
Thank you very much.
Fantastic.